What if the most famous lost civilization in history was not just advanced beyond our imagination, but inhabited by beings of extraordinary size? What if Atlantis, the legendary island that vanished beneath the waves, was home to a race of giants whose very existence challenges everything we think we know about the ancient world? Tonight, we dive into the depths of one of humanity's most enduring mysteries. For over 2,000 years, the story of Atlantis has captured our imagination. But what if we have been missing the most crucial detail of all? What if the Atlanteans themselves were not merely advanced humans, but something far more extraordinary? Giants who walked among magnificent temples, whose divine bloodline granted them not only wisdom and technology, but physical forms that towered above ordinary mortals. The trail begins with Plato himself, writing in ancient Athens around 360 BCE. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he described a civilization so powerful, so advanced, that it seemed almost too incredible to believe. But hidden within his careful words are clues that suggest something even more remarkable. These were not ordinary people who built Atlantis. They were the offspring of gods, blessed with abilities that went far beyond human limitations. And if we follow the threads of ancient mythology, divine bloodlines, and archaeological mysteries, a startling possibility emerges. Atlantis may have been the last refuge of an ancient race of giants, beings whose memory survives only in fragments of myth and legend. This is not merely speculation. Across cultures separated by oceans and millennia, we find consistent stories of giant beings who once walked the earth. From the Nephilim of Hebrew tradition to the divine offspring of Greek gods, from the towering figures carved in stone temples to the mysterious skeletal remains that archaeologists continue to uncover and often quickly suppress. The evidence suggests that our ancestors knew something we have forgotten, that before the Great Flood, before the catastrophes that reset civilization, there were others here. Others whose size matched their power, whose divine heritage made them more than human. Tonight, we will explore the hidden connections between these scattered pieces of evidence. We will examine what Plato really said about the physical nature of the Atlanteans and their god-born rulers. We will delve into the mythology surrounding Poseidon and his giant offspring, and consider whether the 10 royal bloodlines of Atlantis might have inherited more than just political power from their divine ancestor. We will look at the global traditions of giants that span every continent and every culture, and ask whether these stories might be memories of a time when such beings actually existed. The story begins not with human ambition, but with divine love. According to Plato, the sea god Poseidon fell in love with a mortal woman named Cleito, who lived on the island that would become Atlantis. This was no ordinary romance. Poseidon was one of the most powerful of the Olympic gods, ruler of all the oceans, master of earthquakes and storms. When a god of such magnitude takes a human bride, the consequences extend far beyond a simple marriage. Poseidon transformed the island for his beloved Cleito, carving it into concentric rings of land and water, creating a paradise unlike anything the world had ever seen. At the center, he built a magnificent palace where Cleito would be protected and honored. But the true significance lies not in the architecture, but in what Poseidon 10 happened next. Cleito bore sons, 5 pairs of twins, each destined to rule a portion of the great island kingdom. These were not ordinary children. They were the direct offspring of one of the most powerful gods in the Greek pantheon, and a mortal woman. In the mythology of the ancient world, such unions consistently produced beings of extraordinary size and power. The precedent was well established. Poseidon himself was known throughout Greek mythology as the father of giants. His son Orion was a sea-walking giant so tall he could stride across the ocean floor with his head above the waves. Polyphemus, the Cyclops encountered by Odysseus, was another of Poseidon's giant offspring. Antaeus, the giant wrestler who drew his strength from the earth, was born from Poseidon's union with Gaia herself. The pattern is unmistakable. When Poseidon mated with mortal women, the result was consistently beings of superhuman size and strength. Why then should his 10 sons with Cleito be any different? The eldest of these divine princes was named Atlas, and it was he who gave his name not only to the kingdom, but to the entire ocean that surrounded it. Atlas became the first king of Atlantis, and from him descended a royal bloodline that would rule the island for generations. But Atlas was more than just a king. In later Greek mythology, Atlas was depicted as a titan of immense size and strength, condemned to hold up the heavens themselves. While this story comes from different mythological traditions, the consistency of Atlas being portrayed as a giant figure is striking. Could it be that the myths preserve a memory of the actual physical nature of the Atlantean royal family? Plato tells us that the 10 royal bloodlines of Atlantis ruled for many generations, each king passing his throne to his eldest son, maintaining the divine heritage that flowed from Poseidon through their veins. For thousands of years, these god-descended rulers governed their island paradise, expanding its influence across the Mediterranean and beyond. But what did these rulers look like? How did their divine heritage manifest in their physical forms? The clues lie scattered throughout Plato's description and the broader context of ancient mythology. When Plato describes the Temple of Poseidon at the heart of Atlantis, he mentions a golden statue of the god himself, standing in a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses. But the detail that stands out is this: the statue was so tall that Poseidon's figure touched the roof of the temple. This was no ordinary building. Plato describes the temple as a stade in length and 3 plethra in breadth, dimensions that would make it roughly the size of a modern football stadium. For a statue to reach from floor to ceiling in such a massive structure, it would need to be hundreds of feet tall. Was this statue merely an artistic exaggeration, or was it modeled after the actual appearance of Poseidon when he walked among his Atlantean descendants? If the god himself appeared in giant form, it would be natural for his offspring to inherit similar characteristics. The divine bloodline that ran through the Atlantean royal families may have manifested not just in wisdom and power, but in physical stature that set them apart from ordinary humans. This interpretation gains support when we consider the broader context of ancient traditions about giants. Far from being isolated myths, stories of giant beings appear in virtually every culture on Earth. In the Hebrew Bible, we read of the Nephilim, described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. These beings were said to be giants, mighty warriors, who became the stuff of legend. The Book of Enoch, an ancient text that expands on this tradition, describes giants of incredible size, some reaching heights of 3,000 ells, which would make them nearly 2 miles tall. While such extreme measurements might be symbolic rather than literal, they point to a consistent tradition that beings of extraordinary size once walked the earth. In Greek mythology beyond Atlantis, we find numerous examples of divine beings mating with humans to produce giant offspring. Zeus fathered Hercules, whose strength and size became legendary. The Titans themselves, the elder gods who ruled before the Olympians, were consistently portrayed as beings of immense stature. These are not isolated stories. They represent a global pattern of human memory that spans continents and cultures. In Norse mythology, the Jotuns, or frost giants, were a race of beings who predated and often conflicted with the gods themselves. Native American traditions speak of giants who once lived in the Americas, building great mounds and leaving behind bones of unusual size. Hindu texts describe the Daityas and Danavas, races of giant demons who possessed great power and technology. The consistency of these traditions across cultures that had no contact with each other suggests something more than mere imagination. Could these stories be cultural memories of actual beings who once existed? And if so, could Atlantis have been their last great stronghold, the final civilization where the divine bloodlines of the ancient world made their stand against the rising tide of ordinary humanity? Archaeological evidence, though often controversial and sometimes suppressed, provides tantalizing hints that such beings may have actually existed. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, newspapers across America reported the discovery of giant skeletal remains at archaeological sites. The Smithsonian Institution, according to some researchers, systematically collected and then concealed evidence of these discoveries, pursuing what they claim was a deliberate policy of suppressing evidence that contradicted the established narrative of human evolution. In Ohio, Wisconsin, and throughout the Midwest, reports surfaced of skeletons measuring between 7 and 12 feet in height, discovered in ancient burial mounds. These finds were often accompanied by artifacts of unusual sophistication, suggesting that the giant beings possessed advanced knowledge and technology. In Nevada, the mummified remains of red-haired giants were reportedly found in Spirit Cave, wrapped in fine textiles and dating back over 10,000 years. In Florida, hundreds of bog mummies of unusual size were discovered in underwater cenotes, preserved by the unique chemical conditions of the flooded caves. On Catalina Island off the coast of California, archaeologists in the 1920s reportedly uncovered a massive burial complex containing over 4,000 skeletons, including a succession of what appeared to be kings and queens, some measuring over 9 feet in height. The evidence from this discovery, like so many others, was allegedly removed to restricted access storage at the Smithsonian, where it remains hidden from public view. While mainstream archaeology disputes many of these claims, the pattern of discovery and subsequent concealment is remarkably consistent. It suggests that evidence for the existence of giant humans has been systematically removed from the public record, perhaps because it challenges fundamental assumptions about human history and evolution. If such beings did exist, and if they possess the advanced knowledge and technology suggested by some of these archaeological finds, then the legend of Atlantis takes on an entirely new dimension. Consider the implications. If the Atlanteans were indeed giants, descended from the divine bloodline of Poseidon, then their legendary advanced technology makes more sense. Beings of such size and strength could have accomplished feats of engineering that would be impossible for ordinary humans. The massive stone blocks described in Plato's account, the intricate canal systems, the monumental architecture that supposedly covered the island, all of these become more plausible when we imagine builders whose physical capabilities far exceeded our own. The concentric rings of Atlantis, carved from solid rock and separated by channels wide enough for the largest ships, would have required moving millions of tons of stone. The bridges that connected the rings, the tunnels carved through solid rock, the harbour works that could accommodate fleets of vessels. All of these engineering marvels become feasible when we consider builders whose strength and stature were on a completely different scale from modern humans. But size alone does not explain the full scope of Atlantean achievement. The divine heritage that flowed through their royal bloodlines may have granted them more than just physical advantages. In the ancient world, divine blood was associated not only with strength and stature, but with wisdom, magical abilities, and access to knowledge that was hidden from ordinary mortals. The Atlantean kings may have inherited not just the physical characteristics of their divine ancestor, but also supernatural insight into the workings of the natural world. This could explain the advanced technology that Plato attributes to Atlantis, the mysterious metal called orichalcum that was supposedly more precious than gold, the sophisticated understanding of engineering and metallurgy, the ability to create mechanical devices that seemed almost magical to contemporary observers. If the Atlantean rulers possessed knowledge that came directly from divine sources, passed down through their god-descended bloodlines, then their technological achievements become less mysterious and more inevitable. The timeline also becomes significant when viewed through this lens. According to Plato, Atlantis existed 9,000 years before his own time, which would place it around 9,600 BCE. This date coincides remarkably with the end of the last ice age, a period of dramatic climate change and rising sea levels that transformed the face of the earth. It was also a time when, according to many mythological traditions, the age of giants came to an end. The Hebrew tradition places the Great Flood that destroyed the Nephilim at roughly the same period. Norse mythology describes the Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, as a time when the old order passed away and a new world emerged. Hindu chronology speaks of the end of earlier yugas, vast cycles of time when different races ruled the earth. The consistency of these traditions suggests that something significant happened around the end of the Ice Age, something that marked the transition from an earlier epoch dominated by giant beings to the current age of ordinary humans. Could Atlantis have been the last refuge of this earlier race? As sea levels rose and the climate changed, as ordinary humans multiplied and spread across the world, the giant bloodlines may have retreated to their island stronghold in the Atlantic. There, protected by the ocean and sustained by their advanced technology, they may have maintained their civilization for centuries or even millennia after their kind had vanished from the rest of the world. But even Atlantis could not survive forever. According to Plato, the Atlanteans eventually became corrupt and warlike, their divine nature tainted by too much mixing with mortal blood. The gods, led by Zeus, decided that they had become a threat to the natural order and decreed their destruction. In a single day and night of earthquakes and floods, the entire island was swallowed by the sea, taking with it the last remnant of the giant race and their advanced civilization. The destruction of Atlantis may not have been as complete as Plato suggests. While the island itself vanished beneath the waves, carrying with it the temples, palaces, and accumulated knowledge of millennia, some traces of the giant bloodlines may have survived. Scattered references throughout ancient history hint at the persistence of these divine lineages, diminished perhaps, but not entirely extinguished. In the aftermath of the great catastrophe, survivors may have fled to distant shores, carrying fragments of their heritage to far-flung corners of the world. The megalithic structures that dot the globe, from the towering stones of Baalbek to the precisely fitted blocks of Sacsayhuaman, may be the work of these refugees. The knowledge required to move stones weighing hundreds of tons, to cut them with laser-like precision, to transport them across impossible terrain, suggests builders whose capabilities exceeded those of ordinary humans by orders of magnitude. The legends that surround these monuments consistently speak of giants as their builders. In Lebanon, local tradition holds that the massive foundation stones of Baalbek were laid by giants in the time before the flood. The indigenous peoples of Peru maintain that Sacsayhuaman was built by a race of giants who could carry the enormous stones like pebbles. On Easter Island, the Moai statues are said to have walked into position through the power of ancient giants who commanded the very stones to move. These are not mere folklore. They represent a consistent pattern of human memory that connects the world's most enigmatic monuments with beings of extraordinary size and power. The fact that such traditions exist independently across cultures, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, suggests a common source, a shared experience of humanity's encounter with a race that possessed capabilities beyond normal human limits. The bloodline connection becomes even more significant when we examine the ruling dynasties of the ancient world. Many of the earliest pharaohs of Egypt claimed descent from the gods themselves. The Sumerian king lists speak of rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods, suggesting lifespans that far exceeded normal human experience. In many cases, these early dynastic rulers are depicted as being of unusual stature, their statues and reliefs showing them towering over their subjects. Could these royal bloodlines have carried genetic material inherited from the Atlantean survivors? The tradition of divine kingship that appears across ancient civilizations may reflect more than mere political propaganda. It may preserve the memory of actual divine descent, diluted over generations, but still carrying traces of the extraordinary characteristics that once marked the giant race. The Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten presents a particularly intriguing example. His elongated skull, unusual facial features, and apparently abnormal body proportions have long puzzled archaeologists. Some researchers have suggested that Akhenaten and his family line may have carried genetic traits that set them apart from ordinary humans. His radical religious reforms, his apparent knowledge of astronomical cycles unknown to his contemporaries, and his complete transformation of Egyptian art and architecture all suggest access to wisdom that came from sources beyond normal human experience. Similar anomalies appear in skulls discovered at various archaeological sites around the world. The elongated craniums found in Peru, Malta, and other locations show characteristics that differ significantly from normal human anatomy. While mainstream archaeology often attributes these features to deliberate deformation practices, the consistency of the proportions and the additional cranial volume they represent suggests something more complex may be involved. The giants of biblical tradition provide another crucial piece of the puzzle. King Og of Bashan, mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy, is described as having a bed made of iron that measured 9 cubits by 4 cubits, suggesting a ruler of enormous physical stature. Goliath of Gath, the Philistine champion faced by David, is recorded as standing 6 cubits and a span tall, which translates to nearly 10 feet in height. These are not mythological figures, but historical personalities mentioned in texts that claim to be recording actual events. The Philistines themselves present an interesting case study. They appear suddenly in the archaeological record of the Eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE, possessing advanced military technology and architectural knowledge that set them apart from their neighbors. Their origins remain mysterious, with some scholars suggesting they may have been refugees from a maritime civilization that had suffered catastrophic destruction. Could the Philistines have been descendants of Atlantean survivors, carrying with them the genetic legacy of their giant ancestors? The evidence becomes even more compelling when we examine the global distribution of giant skeleton discoveries. Reports from North America describe finds of unusual human remains throughout the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes region, and the southwestern United States. These discoveries often coincide with sites containing advanced artifacts, sophisticated burial practices, and evidence of metallurgical knowledge that seems out of place for the supposed time periods involved. In the American Southwest, the Anasazi culture left behind cliff dwellings and architectural achievements that required engineering knowledge and construction capabilities that challenge our understanding of prehistoric American cultures. Local Native American traditions speak of a race of giants who once inhabited these regions, beings who possessed great knowledge, but who eventually vanished or were driven away. The doorways and living spaces in some Anasazi ruins are notably large, as if designed for inhabitants of unusual stature. The pattern extends to South America, where the Nazca lines in Peru represent another enigma that becomes more comprehensible when viewed through the lens of giant builders. The massive geoglyphs, visible only from great heights, required precise mathematical knowledge and surveying capabilities that would have been extremely difficult for people of normal stature to achieve. The lines themselves are perfectly straight across distances of many miles, requiring sight lines that would only be possible for beings of extraordinary height or with access to aerial observation. In Bolivia, the ruins of Tiwanaku present similar mysteries. The precision-cut stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, are fitted together with joints so tight that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. The level of craftsmanship rivals or exceeds anything achieved by modern construction techniques. Local legends attribute these works to a race of giants who possessed the power to move stones through will alone, making them light as feathers. The technological implications of giant builders extend beyond mere construction capabilities. Beings of extraordinary size would have had proportionally larger brains, potentially granting them cognitive abilities that exceeded normal human intelligence. The cranial capacity of some of the anomalous skulls discovered at archaeological sites shows volumes up to 25% larger than modern human averages. If brain size correlates with intellectual capacity, as some research suggests, then these beings may have possessed mental faculties that enabled technological achievements far beyond what we attribute to ancient civilizations. This enhanced intelligence may have manifested in ways that we recognize today as advanced technology. The mysterious properties of orichalcum mentioned in Plato's account of Atlantis may reflect metallurgical knowledge that combined ordinary metals in ways that created materials with extraordinary properties. The ability to work with alloys that do not occur naturally, to create metals that were stronger and more durable than anything known to the ancient world, could explain how the Atlanteans achieved their legendary technological supremacy. The energy sources that powered Atlantean civilization remain another mystery that giant builders might help explain. Beings of extraordinary size and strength could have constructed mechanical devices on scales that would have been impossible for ordinary humans. The vast canal systems described by Plato, The mechanisms that controlled the flow of water between the concentric rings of the island, the harbour works that could accommodate fleets of massive ships. All of these would have required engineering capabilities that matched the physical strength needed to build them. Some researchers have suggested that the Atlanteans may have harnessed geothermal energy from volcanic sources, or even more exotic power systems based on their understanding of natural forces that remain hidden from modern science. The fact that Atlantis was described as being located in a volcanically active region of the Atlantic Ocean supports the possibility that they learned to tap into the immense energies that lay beneath the Earth's surface. The crystal technology that appears in some interpretations of Atlantean legends may also reflect actual knowledge preserved in fragmented form. Large crystals, particularly quartz formations, can store and amplify electrical energy under the right conditions. Giants with the strength to quarry and position massive crystal formations might have developed energy systems based on principles that we are only beginning to understand today. The destruction of Atlantis takes on new significance when viewed as the end of the Age of Giants. The catastrophe that Plato describes may have been the final act in a global transformation that had been building for centuries. As ordinary humans multiplied and developed their own civilizations, the giant bloodlines found themselves increasingly outnumbered and isolated. Their advanced technology, which had once given them unchallenged dominance, may have become a source of fear and resentment among the emerging human populations. The wars that Plato mentions between Atlantis and the early Greek states may reflect a larger conflict between the old order of giant rulers and the new age of human civilization. The Atlanteans, with their divine heritage and advanced technology, may have seen themselves as the rightful rulers of the world, destined to guide and govern the lesser races. But the humans, despite their individual weaknesses, possessed advantages that the giants lacked. They reproduced more quickly, adapted more readily to changing conditions, and could survive in environments where the giants could not. The cosmic catastrophe that ended the Ice Age may have been the decisive factor that tipped the balance. Rising sea levels, dramatic climate changes, and geological upheavals would have affected giant populations disproportionately. Their greater size meant they required more food, more space, and more stable environmental conditions. As the world transformed around them, their numbers dwindled while human populations expanded into newly habitable territories. The final destruction of Atlantis may have been both a natural catastrophe and a divine judgment, as Plato suggests. The gods who had once mated with humans to create the giant bloodlines may have concluded that their experiment had run its course. The corruption that Plato describes among the later Atlanteans may reflect the inevitable decay that comes when divine blood is diluted over too many generations, leaving beings who possess the physical advantages of their giant heritage but lack the wisdom and restraint that should have accompanied such power. The sinking of Atlantis marked the end of an age. With it went not only a civilization of extraordinary achievement, but also the last concentrated population of beings whose divine heritage had set them apart from the rest of humanity. The survivors, scattered and diminished, could no longer maintain the great works of their ancestors. Their knowledge, passed down through oral tradition, gradually became distorted into myth and legend. Their bloodlines, mixing with ordinary humans, eventually disappeared into the general population, leaving only faint traces in the genetics of certain lineages and the persistent memories preserved in stories of giants who once walked the earth. Yet the memory of the giants did not vanish entirely with the destruction of Atlantis. In the centuries and millennia that followed, traces of their existence continued to surface in ways that both preserved and concealed their legacy. The survivors who escaped the sinking island carried with them fragments of knowledge that would shape the emerging civilizations of the ancient world, though the true source of this wisdom would gradually be forgotten or deliberately obscured. In the immediate aftermath of the catastrophe, small groups of Atlantean refugees may have reached the shores of Africa, the Americas, and the Mediterranean basin. These survivors, bearing the diluted but still recognizable bloodlines of the giants, would have possessed knowledge and capabilities that set them apart from the rest of humanity, apart from the indigenous populations they encountered. Their understanding of astronomy, mathematics, metallurgy, and architecture would have seemed miraculous to peoples who were still struggling with basic survival in the post-cataclysmic world. The evidence for these refugee populations appears in the earliest layers of civilization across multiple continents. In Egypt, the sudden emergence of sophisticated pyramid construction techniques, advanced mathematical knowledge, and precise astronomical alignments suggests the influence of external wisdom that cannot be explained by gradual cultural development. The Great Pyramid of Giza, with its perfect orientation to cardinal directions and its incorporation of mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio, reflects a level of knowledge that seems to have appeared fully formed rather than evolved over time. The builders of this monument demonstrated capabilities that exceeded those of ordinary humans by tremendous margins. The precision required to cut and position stone blocks weighing 15 tons or more, the engineering knowledge needed to create internal chambers with acoustical properties that still baffle modern architects, and the astronomical understanding necessary to align the structure with celestial cycles all point to influences that came from sources beyond the normal development of human civilization. Similar Mesopotamia, the sum patterns emerge across the ancient world. Illyrian civilization appeared with remarkable suddenness around 3500 BCE, bringing with it sophisticated writing systems, advanced agricultural techniques, and architectural achievements that required knowledge of mathematics and engineering far beyond what their supposed predecessors possessed. The Sumerian king lists speak of rulers who reigned for thousands of years, lifespans that would be impossible for ordinary humans, but which makes sense if these early dynasties carried genetic material inherited from longer-lived giant ancestors. The Sumerian texts themselves preserve memories that may be distorted accounts of actual historical events. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes its hero as a being of extraordinary size and strength, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. Gilgamesh is portrayed as towering over normal men, capable of feats that required superhuman power, and possessed of wisdom that came from sources beyond mortal experience. While the epic is often treated as pure mythology, its detailed descriptions of ancient cities, historical events, and technological achievements suggest it may preserve memories of actual rulers who possessed characteristics inherited from the giant bloodlines. The pattern extends to the Americas, where civilizations emerged with similar suddenness and sophistication. The Olmec culture of Mexico, which appeared around 1200 BCE, created massive stone heads that weigh up to 50 tons each. These monuments, carved from single blocks of basalt, required not only artistic skill, but also engineering capabilities that enabled the transportation and positioning of stones, of immense weight. The facial features depicted in these heads are notably different from those of the indigenous populations of the region, showing characteristics that some researchers have suggested may reflect a different racial type entirely. Local traditions among the Maya and Aztec peoples speak of earlier races who possessed great knowledge and built the first cities. These beings are consistently described as giants who taught the ancestors of the indigenous peoples the arts of civilization before disappearing or retreating to hidden realms. The Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Maya, describes multiple creations of humanity, with earlier races being destroyed and replaced by successive generations. These accounts may preserve cultural memories of actual historical transitions between different populations, including the replacement of giant rulers by ordinary human civilizations. The architectural achievements of these early American civilizations support the possibility of giant builders. The precision-cut stones of Sacsayhuaman in Peru fit together so tightly that mortar was unnecessary, yet individual blocks weigh hundreds of tons and were shaped into complex interlocking forms that would challenge modern construction techniques. The transportation of these stones from quarries located miles away across terrain that includes deep valleys and steep mountain slopes would have required capabilities that exceed those of ordinary humans by orders of magnitude. At Ollantaytambo, also in Peru, the remains of what appears to be an ancient quarry show evidence of stoneworking techniques that left marks unlike anything produced by known tools. The surfaces of unfinished blocks show smooth curves and precise angles that suggest cutting methods more advanced than anything attributed to pre-Columbian civilizations. Some researchers have noted that the scale of the work areas, including the size of the stone blocks being prepared, would have been appropriate for workers of unusual stature. The global distribution of megalithic architecture presents perhaps the strongest evidence for the persistence of giant bloodlines after the destruction of Atlantis. From the massive trilithons of Stonehenge to the precisely fitted blocks of Baalbek, from the enormous statues of Easter Island to the underground chambers of Malta, monuments requiring superhuman strength and advanced knowledge appear on every continent. The consistency of construction techniques across cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other suggests a common source of knowledge and capability that was once widespread but gradually disappeared. The Maltese temples, among the oldest freestanding structures on Earth, contain architectural features that seem designed for beings of unusual size. Doorways are notably tall. Internal spaces are proportioned for occupants much larger than normal humans, and the massive stone slabs that form the walls and roofs would have required extraordinary strength to position. Carbon dating places these structures at over 5,500 years old, making them contemporary with the earliest phases of Sumerian civilization and suggesting that giant populations may have persisted in isolated locations long after the destruction of Atlantis. In Lebanon, the temple complex at Baalbek incorporates foundation stones that rank among the largest worked stones ever quarried by human hands. The 3 stones of the trilithon weigh approximately 800 tons each, while an unfinished block in the nearby quarry, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs over 1,000 tons. These massive blocks were not only quarried and shaped with precision, but also transported from the quarry and positioned with accuracy that suggests lifting and moving capabilities far beyond those of ordinary ancient peoples. Local traditions consistently attribute these works to giants who possess the power to move stones through supernatural means. While such accounts are often dismissed as folklore, they may preserve memories of actual construction techniques that involved capabilities we no longer understand. The precision with which these enormous blocks were positioned, the sophisticated joinery methods used to connect them, and the advanced engineering knowledge required to create structures that have withstood earthquakes and centuries of weathering all point to builders whose abilities exceeded normal human limitations. The persistence of giant bloodlines may also explain the recurring appearance of rulers and heroes throughout ancient history who are described as being of unusual stature and possessing superhuman abilities. The pharaohs of Egypt claimed descent from the gods and were often depicted as towering over their subjects in reliefs and statues. While some of this may be artistic convention, the consistency of these portrayals across dynasties suggests that unusual physical characteristics may have been actual traits associated with royal bloodlines. The biblical accounts of giant rulers like King Og of Bashan and warriors like Goliath of Gath may reflect the survival of these bloodlines in certain populations of the ancient Near East. The Philistines, who appear suddenly in the archaeological record around 1200 BCE, brought with them advanced military technology and architectural knowledge that suggests origins in a more sophisticated civilization. Their mysterious appearance coincides with the collapse of several major Bronze Age civilizations around the Eastern Mediterranean, a period that some researchers have connected to natural disasters and population movements that may have been triggered by survivors from earlier catastrophes. The genetic legacy of the giants may have been preserved not only in ruling dynasties, but also in certain populations that maintain their distinctive characteristics through selective breeding practices. The elongated skulls found in various parts of the world, from Peru to Malta to Egypt, show consistent features that differ significantly from normal human cranial structure. While mainstream archaeology often attributes these to artificial deformation, the consistency of proportions and the additional brain volume they represent suggest that at least some of these specimens may reflect natural genetic variations inherited from ancestral populations of unusual characteristics. Recent genetic research has identified anomalies in human DNA that suggest periods of rapid change and population bottlenecks in the distant past. These genetic signatures may reflect the mixing of different human subspecies or even the integration of genetic material from populations that possessed characteristics significantly different from modern humans. While such research is still in its early stages, it raises the possibility that our genetic heritage may be more complex than previously understood. The suppression of evidence related to giant discoveries takes on new significance when viewed in this context. If proof existed that beings of extraordinary size and capability once shared the planet with ordinary humans, it would challenge fundamental assumptions about human evolution, the development of civilization, and our place in the natural order. The systematic removal of anomalous skeletal remains from public view, the classification of giant skeleton discoveries as hoaxes or misidentifications, and the general reluctance of mainstream institutions to investigate claims of unusual archaeological finds may reflect more than simple scientific skepticism. The Smithsonian Institution, according to researchers like Richard Dewhurst, has been particularly aggressive in collecting and then concealing evidence of giant human remains. Newspaper accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries describe numerous discoveries of skeletal remains measuring between 7 and 10 feet, 12 feet in height, often accompanied by artifacts of unusual sophistication. These finds were frequently reported to have been sent to the Smithsonian for further study, after which they disappeared from the public record entirely. The pattern of suppression extends beyond individual discoveries to entire categories of evidence that challenge accepted narratives about human prehistory. Advanced artifacts found in geological contexts that predate the supposed development of human technology, out-of-place objects that suggest the existence of sophisticated manufacturing capabilities in ancient times, and archaeological sites that demonstrate engineering knowledge beyond what is attributed to their builders, are all subject to systematic dismissal or concealment. This suppression may serve multiple purposes beyond simple scientific conservatism. If the general public became aware that beings of extraordinary size and capability once existed, it might raise uncomfortable questions about the true nature of human history and the possibility that our current civilization is not the first to achieve advanced technology. Such knowledge could challenge religious beliefs, evolutionary theories, and social structures that depend on the assumption that modern humans represent the pinnacle of earthly development. The connection to Atlantis makes this suppression even more significant. If evidence exists that giant populations survived the destruction of the legendary island and influenced the development of early civilizations around the world, then the Atlantis story transforms from myth to suppressed history. The implications would extend far beyond archaeology to encompass questions about the true origins of human knowledge, the possibility of cyclical rises and falls of civilization, and the potential for future catastrophes that could reset human development once again. The technological capabilities attributed to the Atlanteans in Plato's account become more credible when viewed as the achievements of beings whose physical and mental capacities exceeded those of ordinary humans. The mysterious metal orichalcum, described as being more precious than gold and possessing properties that made it ideal for both decorative and functional applications, may have been an alloy created through metallurgical knowledge that combined ordinary materials in ways that produced extraordinary results. The ability to create such advanced materials would have required not only theoretical knowledge, but also the physical capability to work with extremely high temperatures and pressures. Giant metallurgists, with their superior strength and larger lung capacity, would have been better equipped to operate the furnaces and forges necessary for advanced alloy production. Their enhanced cognitive abilities, resulting from purport them to understand complexionally larger brains, would have enabled chemical processes and developed techniques that remained beyond the reach of ordinary humans for millennia. The energy systems that powered Atlantean civilization may have been based on principles that we are only beginning to rediscover today. The ability to harness geothermal energy from volcanic sources to create mechanical devices that could channel and amplify natural forces, and to develop power distribution systems that could supply an entire island. Civilization would have required engineering capabilities that matched the physical strength needed to construct such systems. Some interpretations of Atlantean technology suggest that they may have developed methods of manipulating gravitational forces, enabling them to move massive stones and construct buildings that defied conventional architectural limitations. While such capabilities might seem fantastical, they become more plausible when attributed to beings whose understanding of natural laws was enhanced by cognitive abilities that exceeded normal human intelligence and whose physical strength enabled them to conduct experiments and construct devices that would have been impossible for ordinary people to achieve. The destruction of Atlantis, viewed through this lens, represents not just the loss of a single civilization, but the end of an entire epoch in human development. The knowledge and capabilities that the giants had accumulated over millennia of civilization disappeared beneath the waves, taking with it technologies and understanding that humanity would not recover for thousands of years, if ever. The survivors who escaped the catastrophe carried fragments of this knowledge to other shores, but without the full context and the genetic capabilities that had made such achievements possible, much of the wisdom was lost or transformed into myth and legend. The cyclical nature of civilization that appears in many ancient traditions may reflect actual historical patterns rather than mere philosophical concepts. If advanced civilizations have risen and fallen multiple times throughout Earth's history, with each collapse followed by periods of recovery and gradual redevelopment, then our current technological civilization may not be unique, but rather the latest in a series of attempts by human intelligence to master the natural world. The giants of Atlantis may have been the inheritors of knowledge from even earlier civilizations, beings who preserved and advanced the accumulated wisdom of previous ages until their own civilization reached heights that we can barely imagine. Their destruction marked not the first reset of human civilization, but perhaps the most recent and complete, eliminating not only their technology and knowledge, but also the genetic heritage that had made their achievements possible. In this view, the legends of Atlantis serve as more than entertainment or philosophical allegory. They preserve the memory of humanity's greatest achievement and most devastating loss, a civilization of giants whose divine heritage enabled them to transcend the normal limitations of human existence, but whose ultimate fate serves as a warning about the fragility of even the most advanced societies. The search for Atlantis becomes not just an archaeological quest, but a journey into the deepest mysteries of human potential and the recurring cycles that have shaped our species throughout its long and largely forgotten history. The implications of this hidden history extend far beyond academic curiosity. If the giants of Atlantis truly existed, if their bloodline survived the great catastrophe and influenced the development of human civilization, then we must reconsider everything we think we know about our own origins and capabilities. The question becomes not whether such beings once lived, but what their legacy means for us today. Consider the anomalies that continue to surface despite systematic efforts to suppress them. In the archives of small-town newspapers across America, buried in the back pages of scientific journals from the 19th century, hidden in the classified storage rooms of major museums, evidence continues to accumulate. Skeletal remains that exceed normal human proportions by significant margins. Artifacts that demonstrate manufacturing techniques supposedly unknown to ancient peoples. Archaeological sites that show evidence of construction capabilities that challenge our understanding of prehistoric human abilities. The Adena culture of the Ohio River Valley presents a particularly compelling case study. Between 500 BCE and 100 CE, these people constructed massive earthwork complexes that required moving millions of tons of soil with mathematical precision. The Serpent Mound in Ohio stretches over 1,300 feet in length, following natural contours with such accuracy that modern surveying techniques are needed to appreciate its sophistication. Local traditions speak of the mound builders as being of unusual stature, capable of carrying enormous loads and working with stones that ordinary people could not even move. Archaeological excavations in the region have consistently yielded skeletal remains that exceed normal human height by substantial margins. The Creel Mound in West Virginia reportedly contained skeletons measuring up to 11 feet in length. The Miamisburg Mound in Ohio yielded remains that showed not only exceptional height, but also skull characteristics that differed significantly from typical human proportions. These discoveries, made during the era when such finds were still reported openly, suggest that populations of unusual physical characteristics persisted in North America long after the supposed end of the giant bloodlines. The Cherokee and other Native American tribes of the southeastern United States preserve detailed oral histories of encounters with giant peoples who preceded their own arrival in the region. These accounts describe beings of extraordinary height and strength who built the ancient mounds and possessed knowledge of metallurgy and astronomy that surpassed that of ordinary humans. According to Cherokee tradition, these giants were eventually driven away or destroyed in great wars, but not before leaving behind evidence of their presence in the form of massive earthworks and buried artifacts. The consistency of these accounts across tribes that had limited contact with each other suggests a shared historical experience rather than mere mythology. The details preserved in oral tradition often correspond remarkably well with archaeological evidence, including descriptions of giant skeletons buried with copper artifacts, sophisticated tools, and evidence of advanced metallurgical knowledge. These correlations become even more significant when we consider that many Native American oral histories have proven accurate when tested against archaeological and geological evidence. In South America, the evidence for giant populations becomes even more compelling. The Nazca lines of Peru, those mysterious geoglyphs that stretch across miles of desert plateau, make perfect sense when viewed as the work of beings whose height enabled them to survey and direct construction across vast distances. The mathematical precision required to create perfectly straight lines extending for miles across varied terrain would have been nearly impossible for people of normal stature working without modern surveying equipment. But giants with proportionally enhanced visual range and the ability to see over obstacles that would block ordinary human sight lines could have directed the construction of these massive works through direct observation. The fact that the lines are best appreciated from great heights may not indicate that they were designed to be viewed from aircraft, as some theories suggest, but rather that they were created by beings whose natural height provided the elevated perspective necessary for their construction and appreciation. The stone heads of the Olmec civilization present another puzzle that becomes clearer when viewed through the lens of giant builders. These massive sculptures, some weighing up to 50 tons, were carved from single blocks of volcanic basalt and transported across difficult terrain from quarries located many miles away. The facial features depicted in these monuments show characteristics that differ markedly from those of the indigenous populations of the region, suggesting they may have been portraits of rulers whose physical appearance reflected different genetic heritage. Recent analysis of these sculptures has revealed details that support the possibility of giant subjects. The proportions of the heads, when extrapolated to full body size, suggest individuals who would have stood between 9 and 12 feet tall. The sophisticated carving techniques required to create such massive works from extremely hard volcanic stone would have demanded not only artistic skill, but also physical strength far beyond that of ordinary humans. The mystery deepens when we consider the sudden disappearance of the Olmec civilization around 400 BCE. Like many ancient cultures associated with giant populations, they seem to have vanished almost overnight, leaving behind their monumental works, but no clear explanation for their departure. This pattern of sudden disappearance appears repeatedly in connection with civilizations that show evidence of unusual physical capabilities or advanced knowledge that cannot be easily explained by conventional historical models. In Easter Island, the famous Moai statues present similar enigmas. These massive stone figures, some weighing up to 80 tons, were carved from volcanic rock and somehow transported across the island to their final positions. Local tradition maintains that the statues walked to their locations under their own power, a seemingly impossible claim that takes on new meaning when we consider the possibility possess capabilities beyond those that their creators of ordinary humans. Recent experiments have shown that the statues can indeed be walked upright using coordinated rope techniques, but such methods would require teams of workers with extraordinary strength and coordination. The precision with which the statues were carved, including details that are invisible from ground level but perfectly proportioned when viewed from above, suggests sculptors whose height provided natural elevated perspectives during the carving process. The island's oral traditions speak of the Long Ears, a race of tall people who ruled Easter Island before being overthrown by the Short Ears in a great war. Archaeological evidence supports the existence of two distinct populations on the island, with the earlier inhabitants showing skeletal characteristics that suggest significantly greater height and different cranial proportions from the later Polynesian settlers. The sudden end of statue construction around 1500 CE may mark the final elimination of the giant bloodlines that had preserved the knowledge and capabilities necessary for such monumental works. The pattern extends to Europe, where megalithic monuments continue to puzzle archaeologists with their sophisticated construction techniques and massive scale. The trilithons of Stonehenge, each consisting of two vertical stones supporting a horizontal lintel, required not only the ability to transport stones weighing up to 50 tons, but also the engineering knowledge to lift and position the lintels with precision. The mortise and tenon joints that connect the stones demonstrate woodworking techniques applied to massive stone blocks, suggesting builders who possessed both advanced knowledge and the physical capabilities to execute such sophisticated construction. The alignment of Stonehenge with celestial events demonstrates astronomical knowledge that would have required centuries of careful observation and mathematical calculation. The precision with which the monument marks solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles suggests builders who understood complex astronomical relationships and possessed the engineering skills to encode this knowledge in permanent stone. Such capabilities become more plausible when attributed to beings whose enhanced cognitive abilities and extended lifespans would have enabled the accumulation of detailed astronomical observations over many generations. The nearby Avebury stone circle, even more massive than Stonehenge, required moving and positioning stones that weigh up to 60 tons each. The circle encompasses an area so large that an entire village now sits within its boundaries, yet the positioning of each stone was calculated to create specific sight lines and acoustic properties that still function today. The physical effort required to create such works, combined with the sophisticated knowledge they demonstrate, points to builders whose capabilities exceeded those of ordinary Neolithic peoples by extraordinary margins. In France, the megaliths of Karnak present an even more staggering example of prehistoric construction. Over 3,000 standing stones arranged in multiple rows stretch for miles across the Brittany landscape. The stones, some weighing over 300 tons, were quarried transported, and positioned with precision that created complex geometric patterns whose purpose remains mysterious. Local traditions speak of giants who could carry the massive stones like pebbles, placing them in their current positions through supernatural strength. The sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering demonstrated by these monuments challenges conventional assumptions about the capabilities of prehistoric European populations. The precision with which the stone rows are aligned to create specific relationships with celestial events suggests builders who possessed advanced understanding of astronomical cycles and the mathematical knowledge necessary to encode this information in permanent installations. The genetic evidence for the persistence of giant bloodlines becomes more compelling when examined in the context of these global monuments. DNA analysis of skeletal remains from megalithic sites has revealed genetic markers that differ from those of surrounding populations, suggesting that the builders may have belonged to distinct genetic lineages with characteristics that set them apart from ordinary humans. While such research remains controversial and is often suppressed or dismissed, the consistency of findings across multiple sites and research teams suggests that genuine genetic anomalies may be involved. The elongated skulls found at various megalithic sites present particularly intriguing evidence. These remains show cranial volumes that exceed normal human averages by up to 25%. Suggesting brain sizes that would have enabled cognitive capabilities beyond those of ordinary humans. The skull shapes themselves differ from those produced by artificial deformation, showing natural bone structure that appears to represent genetic variations rather than cultural modification. Recent extracted from these anom analysis of DNA loose remains has revealed genetic sequences that do not match those of known human populations. While the implications of these findings remain subject to debate, they suggest the possibility that the megalithic builders may have inherited genetic material from ancestral populations whose characteristics differed significantly from those of modern humans. Such differences could explain both the physical capabilities and the advanced knowledge demonstrated by the monument builders. The suppression of this genetic evidence parallels the concealment of archaeological discoveries that challenge conventional historical narratives. Research that suggests the existence of human populations with significantly different physical or cognitive characteristics faces systematic opposition from academic institutions, government agencies, and scientific organizations that have invested heavily in maintaining established models of human evolution and prehistoric development. This suppression takes many forms, from the denial of research funding to the classification of discoveries as hoaxes or misinterpretations. Researchers who publish findings that challenge orthodox views often find their careers threatened, their work marginalized, and their access to archaeological sites restricted. The systematic nature of this opposition suggests that more than simple scientific conservatism may be involved. The implications of acknowledging the existence of giant populations extend far beyond archaeology and anthropology. If beings of extraordinary physical and cognitive capabilities once shared the planet with ordinary humans, it would challenge fundamental assumptions about human uniqueness, evolutionary development, and our place in the natural order. Such knowledge could undermine social, political, and religious systems that depend on the belief that modern humans represent the pinnacle of earthly intelligence and capability. The connection to Atlantis makes these implications even more profound. If the legendary island was indeed the home of a giant species, And if survivors of its destruction influence the development of civilizations around the world, then human history becomes a story not of independent development, but of inheritance from a more advanced predecessor species. The knowledge and capabilities that we attribute to human genius may actually be fragments of wisdom preserved from the Atlantean legacy, diluted and distorted over millennia, but still recognizable in the achievements of ancient civilizations. The cyclical view of history that appears in many ancient traditions takes on new meaning when viewed in this context. If advanced civilizations have risen and fallen multiple times throughout Earth's history, with each collapse followed by periods of recovery and gradual redevelopment, then our current technological society may be following a pattern that has been repeated many times before. The giants of Atlantis may have been the inheritors of knowledge from even earlier civilizations, beings who preserved and advanced the accumulated wisdom of previous ages until their own civilization reached heights that we are only beginning to approach. The destruction of Atlantis, in this view, represents not just the end of one civilization, but the loss of millennia of accumulated knowledge and genetic potential. The survivors who escaped the catastrophe carried fragments of this legacy to other shores, but without the full context and the genetic capabilities that had made the original achievements possible, much of the wisdom was inevitably lost. What remains today may be only shadows of the true capabilities that the Atlantean giants once possessed. This perspective transforms our understanding of human potential and limitations. If the giants of Atlantis achieved technological and spiritual heights that we have not yet recovered, then our current civilization may represent not progress beyond previous achievements, but rather a gradual recovery from a catastrophic loss. The knowledge we are rediscovering through modern science may be fragments of understanding that was once complete and integrated in ways we have yet to achieve. The search for Atlantis becomes, in this context, more than an archaeological quest or an exercise in mythology. It becomes a search for our own origins and potential, an attempt to recover knowledge and capabilities that may be our right as birth descendants, however distant and diluted, of beings whose achievements surpassed our own. The evidence scattered across the globe, from megalithic monuments to anomalous skeletal remains, from suppressed archaeological discoveries to persistent cultural memories, may be pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, reveals the true scope of human heritage and possibility. The giants sleep beneath the waves, their island paradise lost to the depths of time and ocean. But their legacy lives on in the stones they moved, the knowledge they preserved, and perhaps in the very blood that flows through human veins. The question is not whether they existed, but whether we have the courage to acknowledge their legacy and the wisdom to learn from their fate. For in understanding what they achieved and what they lost, we may yet discover what we ourselves might become, and what we must avoid if we are to surpass, rather than merely repeat, the glories and tragedies of those who came before us. The implications stretch far beyond individual discoveries or isolated anomalies. When we examine the global pattern of evidence, a picture emerges that challenges everything we thought we knew about the relationship between size, intelligence, and technological capability. The giants of Atlantis may not have been mere physical anomalies, but representatives of an entirely different approach to civilization itself. Consider the mathematics involved in their legendary achievements. The concentric rings of Atlantis, as described by Plato, formed perfect circles with precise ratios between their diameters. The bridges that connected these rings, the tunnels that allowed ships to pass between levels, the harbor systems that could accommodate vessels from across the known world. All of these required mathematical knowledge that integrated geometry, hydraulics, and structural engineering in ways that we are only beginning to understand today. But mathematics for beings of extraordinary cognitive capacity would not have been limited to practical applications. The enhanced brain volume suggested by anomalous skull discoveries implies neural processing power that could have enabled mathematical insights that remain beyond our current understanding. Where we see complex equations and lengthy calculations, they may have perceived elegant patterns and intuitive relationships that allowed them to design and construct works of stunning sophistication with apparent ease. The acoustic properties of their constructions provide another window into capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations. The Temple of Poseidon in Atlantis was described as having dimensions that created specific acoustic effects, allowing voices to carry clearly across vast spaces and producing resonances that enhanced the spiritual experience of worship. Modern analysis of megalithic sites around the world has revealed similar acoustic engineering, with chambers designed to amplify certain frequencies while dampening others. These acoustic effects were not accidental, but represented sophisticated understanding of sound wave physics and human auditory perception. The giants who designed these spaces may have possessed hearing capabilities that enabled them to perceive acoustic properties that remain subtle or inaudible to ordinary humans. Their larger ear structures, proportional to their increased size, could have provided enhanced sensitivity to sound frequencies and spatial acoustics, allowing them to create audio environments of extraordinary complexity and beauty. The metallurgical achievements attributed to Atlantis take on new dimensions when we consider the physical advantages that giant smiths would have possessed. Working with metals requires not only theoretical knowledge, but also the physical capability to maintain extremely high temperatures and manipulate heavy materials. The legendary orichalcum, described as being more precious than gold and possessing unique properties, may have been created through techniques that demanded strength and endurance beyond normal human limits. Giant metallurgists would have been able to operate larger furnaces, work with heavier ingots, and maintain the sustained physical effort necessary for advanced alloy production. Their enhanced lung capacity would have enabled them to work in high-temperature environments for extended periods, while their superior strength would have allowed them to forge objects of sizes and complexity that ordinary smiths could not attempt. The tools they created would have been proportioned for their own use, appearing as massive implements to normal humans, but perfectly suited to hands and arms of extraordinary dimensions. The agricultural systems that sustained Atlantean civilization would have been equally impressive. The fertile valleys between the concentric rings were described as producing abundant crops that fed not the surplus for trade with distant lands only the island's population but also provide. Such productivity would have required agricultural techniques that maximized yield while maintaining soil fertility over many generations. Giants working the land would have possessed natural advantages in agricultural development. Their ability to clear forests, move large stones, and dig extensive irrigation systems would have enabled them to transform landscapes in ways that ordinary humans could not achieve without modern machinery. The scale of their agricultural operations could have supported much larger populations than would be possible with conventional farming methods, providing the economic foundation necessary for the advanced civilization that Plato describes. The botanical knowledge required to achieve such agricultural success implies understanding of plant genetics, soil chemistry, and ecological relationships that remained hidden from ordinary humans for millennia. The giants may have developed crop varieties through selective breeding programs that spanned centuries, using their extended lifespans to observe and guide evolutionary changes that would have been impossible for shorter-lived beings to accomplish. Their approach to architecture reflected not only practical needs, but also aesthetic sensibilities that arose from their unique perspective on space and proportion. Buildings designed for giants would naturally incorporate scales and relationships that created entirely different experiential qualities from structures built for normal humans. Doorways that rose to tremendous heights, halls that stretched across vast distances, chambers that soared to cathedral-like proportions. All of these would have been natural and comfortable for beings whose own stature matched the grandeur of their constructions. The artistic achievements of Atlantean civilization may have reached heights that we can barely imagine precisely because they were created by beings whose physical capabilities enabled artistic techniques that remain beyond our reach. Sculptures carved from single blocks of stone weighing hundreds of tons, paintings that covered entire walls with detail visible from great distances, musical instruments designed to produce sounds that could fill enormous spaces. All of these become possible when created by artists whose size and strength matched their aesthetic vision. The spiritual practices of the Atlanteans take on profound significance when viewed through the lens of their giant nature. Beings who stood closer to the heavens, whose voices could carry across vast distances, whose presence commanded natural authority simply through their physical stature, would have developed religious and philosophical systems that reflected their unique relationship to both the natural world and the divine realm from which they claimed descent. Their temples, built on scales that dwarfed anything constructed by ordinary humans, created spaces where the divine and mortal realms could meet in ways that were both literally and figuratively elevated above common experience. The rituals performed in these spaces, conducted by priest-kings whose own stature approached the divine, would have created religious experiences of overwhelming power and beauty that established the Atlantean spiritual system as the foundation for all subsequent religious development. The connection between physical stature and spiritual authority appears consistently throughout ancient traditions. The Hebrew Bible describes encounters between ordinary humans and divine messengers in terms that emphasize the overwhelming physical presence of these beings. Giants are portrayed not merely as large humans, but as creatures whose very appearance inspired awe and terror in those who encountered them. This reaction suggests that the giants possessed qualities that transcended mere size, embodying aspects of the divine that were visible in their physical forms. The Atlantean priest-kings, as direct descendants of Poseidon, would have manifested this divine connection through their extraordinary stature and capabilities, their ability to commune with the gods, to interpret divine will, and to channel supernatural power through their religious practices would have been enhanced by physical characteristics that set them apart from ordinary mortals. The temple rituals they conducted would have been spectacles of such grandeur and spiritual intensity that they established patterns of religious expression that influenced all subsequent human spiritual development. The decline and fall of Atlantis takes on tragic dimensions when viewed as the end of this extraordinary spiritual and cultural achievement. As the divine blood that flowed through the royal lineages became diluted through intermarriage with ordinary humans, The physical and spiritual characteristics that had enabled Atlantean greatness gradually diminished. The later generations of rulers, though still larger and more capable than normal humans, lacked the full divine heritage that had marked their ancestors. This dilution of divine blood manifested not only in reduced physical stature, but also in the corruption of spiritual understanding that Plato describes as the ultimate cause of Atlantean downfall. The later Atlanteans retained the technological capabilities and material wealth of their civilization, but lost the spiritual wisdom that had originally guided their use of such power. They became focused on conquest and material accumulation rather than the divine harmony that had characterized their golden age. The wars that preceded the final destruction of Atlantis may have been the inevitable result of this spiritual corruption. As the giant bloodlines weakened and their divine connection faded, the Atlanteans began to use their superior technology and physical advantages for domination rather than guidance. Their conflicts with the early Greek states, described by Plato as representing the forces of justice and order, symbolized a cosmic struggle between the corrupted remnants of divine authority and the emerging human civilizations that would inherit the earth. The cosmic catastrophe that ended Atlantean civilization can be understood as both natural disaster and divine judgment. The gods who had originally blessed the island with their presence and power withdrew their protection when their descendants proved unworthy of their heritage. Without divine support, the advanced technology that had sustained Atlantean civilization became vulnerable to the very natural forces it had once controlled. The geological evidence for catastrophic events around 9600 BCE supports the possibility that Atlantis was destroyed by actual natural disasters rather than mere mythological punishment. The end of the last ice age brought dramatic changes in sea level, climate, and geological stability that would have threatened any island civilization, no matter how advanced. The combination of rising oceans, increased seismic activity, and climate disruption could have overwhelmed even the sophisticated engineering systems that protected Atlantis. For a civilization built by and for giants, such environmental changes would have been particularly devastating. The massive infrastructure required to support large populations of beings with proportionally greater resource needs would have been vulnerable to disruption in ways that smaller, more flexible human settlements could better survive. The canal systems, harbor works, and agricultural terraces that sustained Atlantean civilization would have required constant maintenance by beings with the physical capabilities to manage such large-scale engineering projects. As the giant population declined through warfare, environmental stress, and genetic dilution, the knowledge and capability needed to maintain their civilization gradually disappeared. The survivors who witnessed the final destruction may have been largely ordinary humans who had lived under Atlantean rule, but lacked the physical and intellectual capabilities to preserve the full scope of giant achievements. Their accounts of the catastrophe, passed down through oral tradition, would have preserved the memory of Atlantean greatness, while inevitably losing much of the technical detail that could have enabled its reconstruction. The refugee populations that scattered from the sinking island carried with them whatever knowledge and capabilities they could preserve, but their to maintain Atlantean traditions would have been limited by their reduced physical and cognitive abilities. The megalithic monuments they constructed in their new homelands represent impressive achievements by the standards of ordinary human civilization, but they pale in comparison to what the original Atlantean giants might have accomplished at the height of their power. The gradual disappearance of giant bloodlines from the human population marked not only the end of an era, but also the loss of capabilities that humanity has never fully recovered. The knowledge preserved in ancient texts and the techniques demonstrated by megalithic monuments may be fragments of a complete understanding that was once integrated and complete in ways we can barely imagine. Our modern technological civilization, for all its achievements, may represent not progress beyond Atlantean capabilities, but rather a different approach to problems that the giants solved through methods we no longer comprehend. The search for Atlantis becomes, in this understanding, a quest to recover not just historical knowledge, but human potential itself. The evidence scattered across the globe, from anomalous skeletal remains to impossible architectural achievements, from suppressed archaeological discoveries to persistent cultural memories, represents pieces of our own heritage. The giants who built the first great civilization were not alien beings, but our own ancestors, whose divine blood still flows, however faintly, through human veins. The implications for our own future become profound when viewed through this lens. If humanity carries within its genetic heritage the potential for capabilities that once enabled the creation of Atlantis, then our current limitations may be temporary rather than absolute. The process of rediscovering and activating this dormant potential could enable achievements that surpass even our technological civilization's most ambitious dreams. But the fate of Atlantis also serves as a warning about the responsible use of such capabilities. The corruption that led to the giants' downfall arose from their loss of spiritual connection to the divine source of their power. As their understanding of cosmic harmony deteriorated, their advanced capabilities became tools of domination rather than instruments of divine will. The catastrophe that ended their civilization may have been necessary to prevent the complete corruption of divine knowledge and to preserve the possibility of its eventual restoration in worthier hands. The cycle of rise and fall that characterizes human civilization may reflect deeper patterns that govern the relationship between divine knowledge and mortal application. Each attempt to rebuild the achievements of the past must confront the same spiritual challenges that faced the Atlanteans. The acquisition of great power demands equally great wisdom, and the maintenance of advanced civilization requires sustained connection to the divine principles that originally inspired its creation. The giants sleep beneath the waves, their magnificent city lost to time and tide. But their legacy lives on in the blood that flows through human veins, in the knowledge preserved in ancient traditions, and in the monuments that still stand as testimony to capabilities that transcend normal human limitations. The question that remains is not whether they existed, but whether we possess the wisdom to learn from their achievements and their failures. As we stand at the threshold of our own technological transcendence, as we unlock the secrets of genetics and approach capabilities that rival those attributed to the Atlantean giants, we face the same choices that confronted our legendary predecessors. Will we use our growing power to serve divine harmony and cosmic order? Or will we succumb to the corruption that destroyed even beings whose heritage was directly divine? The answer may determine not only the fate of our own civilization, but also whether humanity will finally transcend the cycle of rise and fall that has characterized our species throughout its long and largely forgotten history. In the depths of the Atlantic, in the silence of the abyssal plains where no light penetrates and no human eye has ever gazed, the ruins of Atlantis may yet rest. The golden statues corroded by salt water, the crystal technologies darkened by eternal night, the bones of giants scattered among the rubble of their impossible dreams. But even in destruction, even in the ultimate failure of their cosmic ambition, they remain connected to us across the vast expanse of time. Their blood is our blood. Their knowledge is our inheritance. Their fate is our warning. And perhaps, if we prove worthy of the divine heritage that we share, their future will become our destiny. The story of Atlantis has not ended with the sinking of the island. It continues in every human achievement that transcends the ordinary, in every monument that defies explanation, in every discovery that challenges our understanding of what is possible. The giants may be gone, but their legacy endures, waiting for the moment when humanity will finally be ready to reclaim the birthright that was lost beneath the waves so long ago. The convergence of evidence from across the globe suggests something that mainstream academia has long refused to acknowledge. What if the scattered traces we find of impossible achievements, anomalous remains and suppressed discoveries are not isolated mysteries, but fragments of a single coherent truth? What if the giants of Atlantis were not mythological beings, but the last representatives of humanity's true potential? And what if their destruction marked not just the end of a civilization, but the beginning of a deliberate campaign to erase all memory of what we once were? The pattern becomes unmistakable when we examine the systematic way in which evidence of giant populations has been collected and concealed. From the moment European colonists began discovering massive skeletal remains in North American burial mounds, a process of suppression began that continues to this day. The Smithsonian Institution, founded in the decades following these initial discoveries, appears to have served not as a repository of knowledge, but as a vault for inconvenient truths. The timing is significant. As industrialization accelerated and theories of evolution gained acceptance, the existence of giant human populations posed fundamental challenges to emerging scientific orthodoxies. If beings of extraordinary stature had once possessed advanced technologies and sophisticated knowledge, it suggested that human development was not a linear progression from primitive to advanced, but rather a cyclical process of rise and decline. Such a possibility threatened the very foundations of the progress narrative that drove industrial expansion and colonial conquest. The solution was elegant in its simplicity: collect the evidence under the guise of scientific study, then ensure it never reaches public awareness. Newspaper accounts from the late 1800s and early 1900s consistently described giant skeletal remains being shipped to Washington for further analysis, after which they disappeared entirely from the historical record. Researchers who attempted to follow up on these discoveries found their inquiries stonewalled, their access denied, and their questions dismissed. This suppression extended beyond individual artifacts to encompass entire categories of archaeological evidence that challenged accepted narratives. Advanced metalwork found in supposedly primitive contexts, precision-engineered stonework attributed to peoples without metal tools, astronomical alignments that demonstrated mathematical knowledge centuries before its supposed development. All of these discoveries were systematically minimized, reclassified, or removed from consideration entirely. The process was so thorough that by the mid-20th century, the very suggestion that giant human populations had once existed was relegated to the realm of fringe speculation. Academic careers were destroyed for pursuing such research. Funding was denied to projects that might uncover inconvenient evidence, and publications that dared to question orthodox timelines found themselves excluded from scholarly discourse. Yet the evidence itself proved too extensive and too widely distributed to eliminate completely. In remote regions where academic oversight was limited, discoveries continued to surface that defied conventional explanation. The massive stone spheres of Costa Rica, perfectly round granite orbs weighing up to 15 tons, appeared in jungle clearings where no known civilization should have possessed the technology to create them. Local traditions spoke of giants who could roll these stones like marbles, positioning them with precision that served purposes now lost to understanding. In the highlands of Peru, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman continued to baffle engineers with its impossible construction. Stones weighing over 300 tons were fitted together with joints so precise that even modern cutting tools could not improve upon their accuracy. The blocks were shaped into complex interlocking forms that distributed seismic forces with such effectiveness that the structure has survived earthquakes that leveled buildings constructed with contemporary techniques. The official explanation that these works were accomplished by Incan builders using simple tools and abundant labor becomes less credible when examined in detail. The quarries from which the stones were extracted lie miles away across terrain that includes deep valleys and steep mountain slopes. No evidence exists of roads capable of supporting the transportation of such massive blocks, nor of the ramps and pulleys that would have been necessary to position them at their final locations. Local Quechua traditions preserve memories that offer a different explanation. They speak of the Viracocha, giant beings who possess the power to soften stone with their touch, making even the largest blocks light enough to be positioned by hand. While such accounts are dismissed as mythology by conventional archaeology, they describe techniques that would explain the precision and scale of construction better than any proposed orthodox method. The persistence of such traditions across cultures that had no contact with each other suggests that they preserve memories of actual capabilities rather than mere fantasy. In Lebanon, the massive foundation stones of Baalbek are attributed to giants who could lift them into place through supernatural strength. In Malta, the megalithic temples are said to have been built by a race of tall people who possessed knowledge of construction techniques that enabled them to work with stones far larger than normal humans could handle. These traditions become more significant when examined alongside the physical evidence that continues to surface despite systematic suppression efforts. In Romania, the discovery of giant skeletal remains at the Rosia Montana site generated international attention before the findings were quickly classified and removed from public view. The skeletons, reportedly measuring between 8 and 10 feet in height, were accompanied by artifacts that suggested a level of technological sophistication inconsistent with the supposed time period of their burial. Similar discoveries have been reported from sites across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, creating a global pattern of evidence that becomes harder to dismiss as coincidence or misidentification. The consistency of skeletal proportions, the association with advanced artifacts, and the systematic suppression of findings all point to the existence of human populations whose characteristics differed significantly from those of modern people. The genetic implications of such discoveries extend far beyond simple questions of height and physical stature. If giant human populations possessed cranial capacities that exceeded modern averages by substantial margins, as suggested by anomalous skull discoveries, then their cognitive capabilities may have enabled intellectual achievements that we have yet to duplicate. The mathematical knowledge required to construct megalithic monuments with astronomical alignments accurate to within minutes of arc, the engineering understanding necessary to create earthquake-resistant construction techniques, and the metallurgical expertise needed to produce alloys with properties that remain mysterious. Today, all suggest mental capabilities that transcended normal human limitations. Tonight, we have journeyed through the depths of one of humanity's most profound mysteries, following threads that weave together ancient mythology, suppressed archaeological evidence, and the persistent memories preserved in cultures across the globe. What emerges is not merely the story of a lost civilization, but the possibility that we ourselves carry within our very DNA the legacy of beings whose capabilities once transcended the ordinary limits of human existence. The giants of Atlantis may sleep beneath the waves, their island paradise lost to time and tide, but their blood flows through our veins, their knowledge whispers in our monuments, and their potential awaits rediscovery in the genetic heritage we have inherited from ancestors whose true nature has been deliberately forgotten.